Welcome to Animating with the Noise SOP. Noise can be used to help us generate organic patterns and movement, so let's take a look at how we can use the Noise SOP in our networks. Let's use the Tab key to open up the Upgrade dialog and add a Sphere SOP here into our network. Next, let's right-click on the output of the Sphere SOP and add a Noise SOP. And we should see some results right away. We can see our noise animating, and in fact, it looks like our camera's trying to keep up with the movement in our noise SOP. So let's go ahead and turn on the viewer active flag and turn off adaptive homing just so we can kind of better see what's happening here. We can start by experimenting with a few different parameters in the noise SOP. Let's actually take a look at what happens if we turn the amplitude up or down to control some of the animation. And we can also adjust the period of our noise, which is also going to continue to shape some of the behavior of the noise that we see. Now the animation that we see is actually coming from the transform page. We can see that we have a parameter that's animated with an expression here in TZ. Let's go ahead and turn that off for now. And now we can see a kind of frozen version of our noise SOP. Now, one of the things that we might notice right away is it looks like our lighting calculations aren't quite right. So something that we might consider doing is adding an attribute create. And with our attribute create added, we might compute our normals to get a better sense of what this surface might look like. Now this still looks like it could have a few more vertices to me, so let's head back to our sphere SOP. Let's change our primitive type from mesh to polygon and head to the detail page and turn that up a little bit. And here we can see that we start to get a slightly more refined result. If we come back to the noise SOP, we might also continue to adjust our amplitude and just experiment with our results. Now this is a pretty interesting result right away. This has a kind of blobby organic kind of shape to it, but let's see how we might alter this a little bit. I'm actually just going to go ahead and box select all three of these. I'm going to copy and paste, and let's delete this attribute create, and instead let's add a facet SOP here into our network. With the facet SOP added, let's go ahead and connect our noise SOP to the facet. And let's go ahead and turn on unique points and then compute normals at the very bottom. Now we get something that looks a little bit more kind of faceted and tessellated. Now this is a really interesting result, but let's head back to our sphere and turn down the frequency. Now we end up with something that looks a little more low poly and has a more kind of asteroid, kind of space themed kind of look. The noise SOP has a lot of different ways that we can manipulate our input geometry. And in fact, let's go ahead and copy paste our sphere and noise one more time. And let's take a look at a few other alterations we might experiment with. Let's turn on the viewer active flag for our noise. And this time let's right click inside of the viewer active area and select display options. Let's turn on the normals for our surface operator. Now, one of the interesting things to know is that our noise is projected along the vector of our normal. So we can see how our points actually, if we turn the animation here back on with our expression, abs time.seconds, we can see that this movement is actually happening right along the vector that is our normal. And that's helpful to know because that actually tells us a lot about how our noise might be animated and some of the techniques that we might use when we're working with our noise SOP. Now, there are some other things that we can do. So if we head back over to the noise page, we can see that instead of moving the attribute position, we might instead move our point normals. If we turn up the amplitude here slightly, we'll start to see this kind of wave around a little bit more. And this result gives us an interesting change because this actually moves the normals of our surface operator, which actually is going to affect the way that light behaves on its surface. We might also instead select to apply this to the point diffuse color, and we can see how that actually changes our color here slightly. So that's another way that we might think about using our noise SOP. Let's do one other trick that we might find useful. Let's add a grid SOP here to our network. Let's go ahead and change the orientation. Instead of being XY, let's make that ZX. I'm gonna make the grid viewer active and just pan here slightly. Let's go ahead and connect that to a noise SOP. Let's head back to our grid and let's make sure that we've switched this over to polygon. I'm gonna turn up the size here, I think to something like 10 by 10. going to come back over to my noise, and then I'm going to stop the transformation here. Next, I'm going to connect this to a facet SOP. And with my facet SOP selected, I'm going to make it viewer active. I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit. And then I'm going to turn on unique points and compute normals. And here we can see right away how we might use this for our kind of landscape. We could continue to play with this a little bit. One thing we might do is come back to our grid and turn up the number of rows and columns. Let's go up to say maybe like 80 by 80. And we can see now that we have a really interesting topography that we're starting to get to experiment with. Now, in this case, we might decide that we don't really want the low poly kind of look here. And in that case, let's come back and just turn off unique points and keep just our computed normals. And we can see how it would be really easy to start to think about how we could turn this into rolling hills or mountain ranges that we might use for a piece of geometry, or waves or water. So that's just a few of the ways that we might use the Noise SOP to create surfaces that we can interact with or use for our projects.